On August 16, 1988, the Miami Beach Police Department received what seemed like a routine welfare check request. The caller, a concerned neighbor named Maria Santos, reported that newspapers had been piling up outside the Morrison family's beach house at 3847 Ocean Drive for 2 days. The sprinklers were still running on schedule. The porch light remained on. But something felt wrong. Maria Santos stood on the sidewalk that morning, her voice steady as she spoke to the responding officer. "They wouldn't just leave without telling someone," she insisted. Robert Morrison was meticulous about these things. The Morrison family consisted of 4 people. Robert Morrison, 42 years old, ran a successful import-export business specializing in Colombian coffee. His wife, Linda, 38, taught Spanish at the local high school. Their 2 children, 16-year-old Jennifer and 14-year-old Michael, were known in the neighborhood as polite, studious teenagers who helped elderly neighbors with groceries. They had lived in the Art Deco beach house for 5 years, becoming fixtures in the tight-knit community. The house itself was a 2-story structure painted in soft coral pink, typical of the Miami Beach architecture from the 1930s. When officers entered the property that morning, they found a scene that would puzzle investigators for decades. The dinner table was set for 4. Food remained on the plates, though it had long since spoiled in the August heat. The television was still on, tuned to static. Linda Morrison's purse sat on the kitchen counter with her wallet inside. Robert's car keys hung on their usual hook by the door. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of struggle. The family had simply vanished. Detective Frank Torres arrived at the scene within an hour. A 20-year veteran of the Miami Beach Police Department, Torres had seen his share of missing persons cases. But this one felt different. "Most missing families, you find evidence of planning," Torres would later recall in his initial report. Packed bags, cleaned-out bank accounts, goodbye notes. The Morrisons left in the middle of dinner. The investigation began with the basics. Phone records showed Robert Morrison had made 3 calls on August 14th, the last day anyone had seen the family. 2 were to numbers that turned out to be payphones in downtown Miami. The third was to his business partner, Carlos Mendez. The call lasted 47 seconds. Carlos Mendez operated an import company that worked closely with Morrison's business. Originally from Bogota, Carlos had been in Miami for 10 years, building what appeared to be a legitimate enterprise in the coffee trade. When investigators reached him, Carlos seemed genuinely shocked. "Robert and I had dinner just 2 days before they disappeared," Carlos told Detective Torres. "We discussed expanding our operations to include Venezuelan cacao." Everything was normal. Maria Santos proved to be an invaluable witness in those early days. She had lived next door to the Morrisons for 3 years, moving in shortly after her divorce. A bookkeeper by profession, Maria worked from home and kept irregular hours, which meant she often noticed the comings and goings in the neighborhood. "Linda Morrison was my closest friend here," Maria explained to investigators. "We had coffee every Tuesday morning. When she didn't show up that week, I knew something was wrong." According to Maria, the last time she saw the Morrison family was around 8 o'clock on the evening of August 14th. They were in their backyard, apparently having a barbecue. She remembered the smell of grilled fish drifting over the fence. Music was playing, something Latin, she thought. Robert Morrison had waved to her over the fence. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary. The timeline of August 14th began to take shape through various witness accounts. At 3:30 that afternoon, Jennifer Morrison had been seen at the local library, checking out books for a school project. The librarian remembered her specifically because Jennifer had asked about Caribbean history, mentioning her father's business connections to Colombia. At 4:45, Michael Morrison bought ice cream from a vendor on Ocean Drive. The vendor, who knew the boy well, said Michael seemed in good spirits, talking about an upcoming soccer tryout. At 6:15 that evening, a gas station security camera captured Robert Morrison filling up his BMW. The timestamp was clear. Robert appeared calm in the grainy footage, even stopping to clean his windshield. This would be the last confirmed sighting of any family member outside their home. The credit card transaction showed he purchased 15 gallons of premium gasoline and a bottle of water. Detective Torres interviewed Carlos Mendez multiple times during the first week of the investigation. Carlos's story remained consistent. He had been at a business dinner in Coral Gables on the night of August 14th with 7 other coffee importers. The restaurant confirmed his reservation and payment. Witnesses placed him there until nearly midnight. Robert was more than a business partner, Carlos insisted during one interview. Our families knew each other. Our children played together. Why would anyone want to hurt them? But as investigators dug deeper into Robert Morrison's business dealings, questions began to emerge. Bank records showed large cash deposits over the previous 6 months, amounts that didn't quite match the documented coffee sales. The deposits were structured just below the reporting threshold, a pattern that raised red flags. Robert had also recently increased his life insurance policy to $2 million, with Linda as the sole beneficiary. A breakthrough seemed to come when investigators discovered Robert had rented a safety deposit box at a bank in downtown Miami just 3 weeks before the disappearance. When they obtained a warrant to open it, they found something unexpected. Inside were documents suggesting Robert Morrison had been in contact with the Drug Enforcement Administration. There were handwritten notes about shipping routes, dates, and what appeared to be code names. A business card for DEA Special Agent William Chen was tucked between the pages. Special Agent Chen confirmed that Robert Morrison had approached the DEA 6 months earlier. He came to us with information about cocaine being smuggled through coffee shipments, Chen explained in a classified briefing. Robert was in a unique position to observe and document these activities. He agreed to cooperate in exchange for immunity from any inadvertent involvement in his partner's operations. This revelation cast Carlos Mendez in a new light. The coffee business that had seemed so legitimate now appeared to be a perfect cover for drug trafficking. The large cash deposits in Robert's account could have been payments for his cooperation with federal authorities. Detective Torres immediately moved to bring Carlos in for formal questioning, but when officers arrived at his apartment, they found it empty. The landlord said Carlos had paid his rent through the end of the year, but hadn't been seen for 2 days. Maria Santos continued to assist the investigation, offering new memories and observations as the days passed. She recalled seeing a white van parked on their street the night of August 14th. Unusual because parking was typically restricted to residents. I thought it might be a delivery truck, she said, but it was there for hours. I remember because my cat kept staring at it through the window. She also mentioned that Robert had seemed anxious in the weeks leading up to the disappearance. He installed new locks on all the doors, Maria noted, and he started parking his car in different spots, never the same place twice. The investigation took another turn when Detective Torres discovered a building permit filed for the Morrison house just 1 month before the disappearance. The permit was for foundation repair and renovation of the basement area. The contractor listed was a company called Coastal Construction, but when investigators tried to locate the business, they found it had been dissolved just days after the Morrison family vanished. The owner, according to records, was a Thomas Chen, no relation to the DEA agent. Thomas Chen had apparently left Miami for Costa Rica on August 15th, 1 day after the Morrisons disappeared. Phone records revealed another puzzling detail. On the morning of August 14th, someone had called the Miami Beach Power Company from the Morrison house, reporting intermittent outages and requesting a service check. The power company logged the call, but noted that when their technician arrived at 9:45 that evening, no one answered the door. The technician reported that the house was dark except for the porch light, which seemed to contradict Maria Santos's observation of activity at 8 o'clock. As weeks turned into months, the case grew cold. Carlos Mendez remained missing, though there were reported sightings in Colombia that could never be confirmed. The DEA continued their investigation into the drug trafficking operation, making several arrests, but none that directly connected to the Morrison disappearance. Detective Torres filed report after report, each one raising more questions than answers. How could an entire family vanish without a trace? Why leave in the middle of dinner? And if Robert's cooperation with the DEA had been discovered, why take the entire family? Maria Santos became something of a local expert on the case. She gave interviews to newspapers, always emphasizing her friendship with Linda Morrison and her desire to see justice done. They were good people, she would say. Whatever Robert might have been involved in, Linda and those children were innocent. They deserved to be found. She organized neighborhood searches, distributed flyers, and maintained a vigil outside the Morrison house every August 14th. The years passed without resolution, but the Morrison case remained active in the files of the Miami Beach Police Department. Detective Torres, despite pressure to focus on newer cases, continued to review the evidence periodically. In 1992, he discovered a discrepancy that had been overlooked. The construction permit for the Morrison house had been approved in just one day, highly unusual for Miami Beach's notoriously slow bureaucracy. The official who signed off on it had retired shortly after and moved to Arizona. When Torres finally tracked him down, the man claimed he didn't remember the specific permit, but admitted that Summer had been particularly busy with special requests from higher up. Maria Santos remained in her house next door even as the neighborhood changed around her. The Morrison house was eventually sold at auction to a developer who converted it into rental units. Maria protested the sale, arguing the property was still a potential crime scene, but without bodies or evidence of foul play, authorities couldn't prevent the transaction. She watched as workers renovated the house, always alert for any discoveries, but nothing unusual was found. The new foundation work covered whatever secrets might have been there. In 1995, an unexpected lead emerged. A woman in Jacksonville called the Miami Beach Police, claiming to have seen Linda Morrison at a shopping mall. Detective Torres drove there personally to interview her. The woman was certain about what she'd seen, even providing details about a scar on Linda's hand from a cooking accident. But when Torres reviewed security footage from the mall, the woman in question looked nothing like Linda Morrison. It was another false lead in a case full of them. Carlos Mendez resurfaced briefly in 1998, sending a letter to Detective Torres through his lawyer. In it, he proclaimed his innocence and expressed sadness over the Morrison family's disappearance. "I have been painted as a villain in this tragedy," the letter read. "But I lost a dear friend and business partner that night. Yes, I left Miami, but only because I feared for my own safety once Robert's connection to the DEA became known. There were people who might have assumed I was also an informant." The letter came from Venezuela, outside U.S. jurisdiction, and Carlos never agreed to return for questioning. The DEA's investigation had revealed that Robert Morrison had indeed been preparing to testify in a major case. Agent Chen disclosed that Robert had documented at least 12 shipments containing cocaine hidden within coffee beans. The operation was sophisticated, involving multiple shell companies and international wire transfers. Robert's testimony could have led to dozens of arrests and disrupted a significant portion of the Colombian cartel's operations in South Florida. But without Robert, the case had fallen apart. Maria Santos developed her own theory over the years. She believed the family had been taken somewhere and killed, their bodies disposed of at sea. The boat traffic that night was heavy, she told anyone who would listen. It was a new moon, very dark. Perfect conditions for making people disappear. She had researched ocean currents, calculating where bodies might wash up, and regularly walked beaches from Key Biscayne to Fort Lauderdale, looking for any sign of the Morrisons. In 2001, Detective Torres was forced to retire due to budget cuts, but he took copies of the Morrison files with him. In his retirement, he became obsessed with solving the case. He created elaborate timelines on his garage wall, connecting string between photos and documents like a scene from a detective movie. His wife would later say he talked about the Morrisons more than their own grandchildren. Torres even hired a private investigator with his pension money to track down leads in Colombia. The private investigator, a former FBI agent named James Riley, spent 6 months in Colombia following Carlos Mendez's trail. He discovered that Carlos had indeed been involved in cocaine trafficking, just as the DEA suspected, but had mysteriously retired from the business in 1989, less than a year after the Morrisons disappeared. Carlos was living quietly in a suburb of Bogotá, running a legitimate restaurant. When Riley approached him unofficially, Carlos agreed to speak off the record. "I know what people think," Carlos said, "but I didn't harm that family." Bad for business to kill DEA informants. Brings too much heat. Someone else wanted them gone, someone with different motivations. Back in Miami, Maria Santos had her own challenges. In 2003, she was audited by the IRS, which discovered irregularities in her bookkeeping business. She had been keeping 2 sets of books for several clients, helping them evade taxes. The investigation revealed she had been doing this for years, possibly even back to 1988. She served 18 months in federal prison, but maintained it had nothing to do with the Morrison case. "I made mistakes with my business," she admitted to a reporter, "but I would never hurt the Morrisons. Linda was teaching me to speak better English. Why would I harm my friend?" Upon her release from prison, Maria returned to Miami Beach, though not to her old house next door to the Morrison property. She moved to a small apartment in North Beach, working as a cashier at a grocery store. She still attended the annual vigils for the Morrison family, though by then fewer and fewer people remembered the case. The vigils had dwindled from dozens of participants to just a handful of elderly neighbors and true crime enthusiasts who had read about the case online. In 2010, a documentary filmmaker named Sarah Peterson became interested in the Morrison case. She interviewed Detective Torres, Maria Santos, and even managed to get Carlos Mendez on camera via video call. The documentary, titled Vanished on Ocean Drive, aired on a cable network and briefly renewed interest in the case. It presented 3 theories. The cartel killed them for Robert's betrayal, they entered witness protection, or they were victims of a random crime unrelated to the drug trade. Detective Torres dismissed the witness protection theory. "I checked with every contact I had," he said in the documentary. "The Marshals Service had no record of the Morrisons. Besides, they don't usually take whole families, and they certainly don't stage elaborate disappearances from dinner tables." But the documentary did uncover one new piece of information. A retired Miami Beach building inspector recalled being pressured to fast-track the Morrison house permit. "Someone wanted that foundation work done quickly," he said. "I remember because it was so unusual. But I can't remember who was pushing for it." Maria Santos watched the documentary from her apartment, providing commentary to Sarah Peterson in a follow-up interview. "They got some things wrong," Maria insisted. "The timeline isn't quite right. I saw the family at 8, but the power company says the house was dark at 9:45. That's less than 2 hours. What happened in those 2 hours?" She had developed detailed theories about those crucial 105 minutes, even drawing diagrams of possible scenarios. The documentary's airing brought forward several new witnesses who hadn't previously come forward. A jogger remembered seeing the white van Maria had mentioned, noting it had an unusual antenna array on top. A marine supply store owner recalled Robert Morrison purchasing anchor chains and weights just days before the disappearance, though he had assumed it was for Robert's small sailboat. These details added to the mystery without providing clear answers. In 2015, Thomas Chen, the mysterious contractor, was finally located in Costa Rica by an investigative journalist. Chen agreed to an interview, his first public statement about the case. He claimed he had been hired to do legitimate foundation repair, but had left Miami for unrelated business reasons. The timing was coincidental, he insisted. I had a job opportunity in Central America. I didn't even know the Morrisons were missing until weeks later. When pressed about the quick permit approval, Chen suggested someone else had expedited it, though he couldn't or wouldn't say who. By 2020, Detective Torres had passed away, still obsessed with solving the case. His widow donated his files to the Miami Beach Police Department, where they were digitized and re-examined with modern investigative techniques. DNA technology had advanced significantly since 1988, but without bodies or crime scene evidence, there was little to test. The case remained as cold as ever, a perfect disappearance that defied explanation. Then came Hurricane Nicole in November 2022. The Category 1 hurricane wasn't particularly devastating by Florida standards, but it caused significant beach erosion along Miami Beach's coastline. The storm surge was higher than expected, washing away tons of sand and exposing foundations of beachfront properties that hadn't been visible in decades. The Morrison property, now subdivided into rental units, suffered significant damage. The new owners hired a construction crew to assess the foundation, the same foundation that had supposedly been repaired in 1988. What the construction crew discovered on November 15, 2022, would finally provide answers to questions that had haunted Miami Beach for 34 years. The hurricane storm surge had not only eroded the beach, but had also undermined a section of the foundation that appeared to have been sealed with a different type of concrete than the rest. The inconsistency was subtle, but the foreman, a veteran of 40 years in construction, noticed it immediately. When they began excavating to assess the damage, they found something that made them immediately stop work and call the police. The Miami Beach Police arrived within minutes, followed shortly by crime scene technicians and the FBI. What they discovered beneath that carefully sealed section of foundation confirmed what many had long suspected but could never prove. The forensic team worked for 3 days, meticulously documenting everything. The evidence had been preserved by the concrete seal, protected from the elements for more than 3 decades. DNA testing would later confirm the identities, finally providing closure to a mystery that had seemed unsolvable. The discovery triggered a renewed investigation with modern resources and technology. Investigators re-examined every piece of evidence from 1988 with fresh eyes. The first revelation came from analyzing the phone records with modern software. The calls to payphones that Robert Morrison had made were traced to locations near 2 specific businesses, a marine supply store and a concrete company. Both had been paid in cash for large orders in early August 1988, according to reconstructed financial records. Maria Santos, now 73 years old and still living in North Beach, was brought in for questioning once again. This time, investigators had new leverage. Enhanced audio analysis of her original 1988 police interviews revealed stress patterns consistent with deception when discussing specific time frames. Her claim of seeing the family at 8 o'clock conflicted not just with the power company report, but with a newly discovered detail, a time-stamped receipt showing she had been at a pharmacy in Aventura at 7:45 that evening, a 20-minute drive from Ocean Drive. When confronted with this discrepancy, Maria initially maintained her story had been consistent. "Memory plays tricks," she said. "After all these years, maybe I was confused about the time." But investigators had more. They had found her employee identification badge in archived evidence photos from 1988, barely visible in her purse during one of her interviews. The badge wasn't for a freelance bookkeeping business, as she had claimed, but for a company called International Trading Solutions, a firm that investigators discovered had been a shell company connected to money laundering operations. The investigation revealed that International Trading Solutions had been moving money for the same cartel that Carlos Mendez had been working with. But while Carlos had been involved in drug smuggling, Maria's role had been different. She had been managing the financial side, converting drug money into legitimate business investments. Robert Morrison's import-export business had been one of those investments, though Robert himself had been unaware of the source of his venture capital funding. The crucial revelation came when investigators discovered that Robert Morrison hadn't just been documenting drug shipments for the DEA. In his safety deposit box, beneath the documents about shipping routes, forensic accountants found evidence that Robert had discovered discrepancies in his own company's books. Someone had been skimming money from the cartel's investments, nearly $2 million over 18 months. The handwriting on the margin notes matched samples from Maria Santos's booking records, which had been seized during her 2003 tax evasion case. Maria had been embezzling from the cartel while managing their money laundering operations. When Robert discovered the discrepancies and started asking questions, Maria realized her scheme was about to be exposed. If the cartel discovered her theft, her fate would have been sealed. But she had another problem. Robert was about to testify to the DEA, which meant all financial records would be scrutinized. Either way, her embezzlement would be discovered. The white van that Maria had so helpfully remembered for investigators belonged to a defunct electrical company that, records showed, Maria had used for her bookkeeping business in 1987. She had kept the van after the company closed, storing it in a garage she rented under an assumed name. Security footage from a traffic camera, recently digitized from Old City archives, showed the van heading toward Ocean Drive at 7:15 on August 14th, with Maria driving. The power outage report to the utility company had been made from the Morrison house phone, but voice analysis technology not available in 1988 revealed it wasn't Robert Morrison's voice. It was a woman trying to sound like a man. The call had been made to create a reason for the house to be dark, establishing an alibi for why no one would answer the door when the technician arrived. Investigators pieced together the timeline. Maria had arrived at the Morrison house around 7:30 after filling prescriptions at the pharmacy that would later become her alibi's undoing. She had likely told the family she had urgent information about the DEA investigation or the business irregularities. The Morrisons, trusting their neighbor and friend, had let her in. What happened next was swift. The family never had a chance to resist or escape. The construction permit that had been fast-tracked through the city bureaucracy traced back to a contact Maria had through her money laundering network. The same contact had ensured Thomas Chen's construction company got the job. Chen, investigators learned, had been paid $50,000 to do the foundation work without asking questions. He had genuinely not known what was concealed beneath the concrete he poured, but he had suspected something illegal and fled to Costa Rica to avoid involvement. Maria had orchestrated everything. She had created the narrative of the family's disappearance, pointed suspicion toward Carlos Mendez, and positioned herself as the helpful neighbor desperate to find her missing friends. For 34 years, she had attended vigils, given interviews, and maintained the fiction of her innocence. Even her prison sentence for tax evasion had been a calculated risk. Better to serve time for financial crimes than face investigation for something far worse. The revelation about Maria Santos sent shockwaves through the true crime community that had followed the case for decades. Sarah Peterson, the documentary filmmaker, immediately began production on a follow-up film. "We all looked right past her," Peterson admitted. "She was so helpful, so present, so seemingly devoted to finding the truth." It was the perfect cover. Carlos Mendez, still living in Colombia, gave a statement through his lawyer expressing relief that the truth had finally emerged. "For 34 years, I've lived under suspicion," the statement read. "Yes, I was involved in illegal activities, but I never harmed the Morrison family." Robert's cooperation with the DEA ended our business relationship, but I harbored no personal animosity. I hope this revelation brings peace to those who loved them. When investigators arrested Maria Santos on December 1, 2022, she initially maintained her innocence. But faced with overwhelming evidence, including DNA matches and financial records that directly linked her to the crime, she finally broke. In a recorded confession, she admitted to visiting the Morrison house that night with the intention of silencing Robert before he could testify. "I didn't plan for the whole family," she said quietly. "But they were there. They had seen me, and I couldn't leave witnesses. It happened so fast. Then I had to protect myself." Maria revealed that she had used her connections in the construction industry to arrange for the foundation work. The bodies had been placed in a section of the basement that was then sealed with concrete, the renovation permit providing perfect cover for any construction activity. She had paid Thomas Chen to complete the work without questions, and he had done exactly that, pouring a new foundation over the concealed evidence. For 34 years, Maria had lived next door to her victims, tending her garden just feet from where they lay. She had comforted other neighbors, organized searches, and spoken to reporters, all while knowing exactly where the Morrison family was. She had moved away only when the property was sold, unable to bear watching strangers live in what she knew was a tomb. The psychological evaluation of Maria Santos revealed a complex personality capable of extreme compartmentalization. She had genuinely developed feelings for Linda Morrison as a friend, teaching her Spanish and sharing coffee, even as she plotted to protect herself from exposure. The psychiatrist's report noted that Maria showed signs of antisocial personality disorder, able to mimic appropriate emotions while feeling no real remorse for her actions. In March 2023, Maria Santos was formally charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder, along with numerous federal charges related to money laundering and racketeering. The prosecutor announced they would seek life in prison without the possibility of parole. Maria, now 74, would likely spend her remaining years behind bars. The Morrison house on Ocean Drive was demolished in April 2023. The site became a small memorial park with a plaque remembering Robert, Linda, Jennifer, and Michael Morrison. The inscription read simply, "A family taken too soon, found too late, but never forgotten." Local residents planted 4 palm trees, one for each family member, creating a living memorial that would grow and thrive where tragedy had once been hidden. The case files, now completely digitized and declassified, became part of FBI training materials for identifying and investigating long-term deception in cold cases. The Morrison case taught investigators the danger of overlooking helpful witnesses who insert themselves into investigations. Statistical analysis showed that in 12% of cold cases, the perpetrator had been interviewed multiple times as a witness, their helpfulness deflecting suspicion. Detective Torres's widow attended Maria Santos's sentencing in September 2023. "My husband never stopped believing this case would be solved," she told reporters. "He would have been satisfied to know his instincts were right. The answer was always there, hiding in plain sight." Maria Santos fooled everyone by being exactly what we expected a concerned neighbor to be. The final piece of the puzzle came during Maria's sentencing hearing when she was asked if she had anything to say. She stood, looked at the packed courtroom, and spoke clearly. "I spent 34 years pretending to grieve for the Morrisons. The truth is, I grieved only for myself and what my life became that night. I was supposed to be managing millions, living in luxury. Instead, I became prisoner to my own deception, trapped next door to my guilt, performing concern for the cameras and neighbors. In trying to save myself, I destroyed everything." The judge sentenced Maria Santos to 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. As she was led from the courtroom, the gallery remained silent, processing the end of a mystery that had defined a community for more than 3 decades. Outside the courthouse, a small group held photos of the Morrison family, finally able to mourn properly now that the truth was known. The Morrison case stands as a reminder that the most dangerous predators are often those who appear most helpful, most concerned, most present in our lives. It took a hurricane to unveil what human investigation had missed, nature succeeding where technology and intuition had failed. The tragedy that befell the Morrison family on that August night in 1988 was senseless, born from greed and desperation rather than the drug war violence everyone had assumed. In the end, the Morrison family's story became not just about their tragic fate, but about the persistence of truth. Hidden beneath concrete and decades of deception, the evidence had waited patiently for discovery. The beach house that had been their home became their resting place, and finally, after 34 years of questions, the Morrison family could truly rest in peace. The void they left in the community had never healed, but now, at least, it could begin to close with the knowledge that justice, though delayed, had finally been served.